Good evening, everyone. I'm Sean Pendley, Deputy Director of Planning, and I'd like to call this meeting to order for the Board of Zoning Appeals for Johnson County. Thank you all for being here this evening. This is exciting. This is the first meeting for our new Board of Zoning Appeals, and it's the first meeting we've had in 2 years. So what I like to do, start off our first order of business, we'll do a roll call, and then we'll get into some of the orders of business, and I'll start that until we have our election of officers. So I'll turn it over to Melissa for roll call.
Brian Rutherford.
Present.
Daniel Ryan is absent. AJ Lang. Andrew Belt. Rosemary Mail. And Tim Orrick. Thank you. We do have a quorum, and I will proceed with our hybrid statement. This meeting is now being recorded in the board hearing room with BZA members attending in person. There is also an option for virtual attendance on Zoom webinar. For Zoom participants wishing to speak, please use the raise hand function in the Zoom app at the start of the agenda item on which you desire to comment. Comments will be received from in-person attendees first, followed by Zoom participants. When it is your turn to speak, the moderator will recognize you by the name or phone number used to join the Zoom webinar. Please state your name and the city and state where you reside for the record, followed by your comments. All public speakers will be limited to 3 minutes unless the chair designates a different time period. If you have trouble with Zoom, please call 913-715-9666. Board members, staff, and presenters, please state your name every time you begin talking, and please speak into the microphone so that your comments can be transcribed for the record. This is a public meeting. We are presenting live and recording the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. This is Sean Pendley again with planning staff. So next, we'll go through the order of business here. And so the first order is for election of officers. So we do need to elect a chair and a vice chair, and then we'll turn it over to the chair to proceed. But then after that, it'll be consideration of the bylaws. So we'll go through any discussion and questions on that. Then we get into the actual agenda items. And there is only one application this evening for a variance request. So we'll start that after we do the election. But first order of business will be election of officers. So I'll seek any nominations for the chair and vice chair. And we'll do a motion and we'll vote on that as well. And just so you all know, we'll do election of officers every year. So we'll do this annually. And again, this board meets only as needed. So as we have an appeal case, we would have a meeting, but it would meet up to once a month if necessary. But generally, on average, we've had about 1 or 2 meetings a year lately. So with that, I'll turn it over to seek election of officers.
Yeah. AJ, you don't need to pile in. He's religious about this. I don't think I'm gonna volunteer. You're the stalwart. I know you love boards. Yeah.
So, yes, make sure your microphone is on. We appreciate that.
I did too. AJ, if you'll serve as chair, I'll vice chair. I'll offer that as the all.
Second.
Sounds like we have a motion and a second for a Mr. Lang as the chair and Mr. Belt as the vice chair. Do you want to take a vote on? Let's do the chair first. AJ Lang as chair. Do a roll call.
Yeah. Do we have a second for that?
Yes, I think Brian Rutherford seconded that.
Okay. Yeah. Brian Rutherford? Rutherford? Just say
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Motion.
AJ Lang,
Aye.
Andrew Belt,
Aye.
Rosemary Mail,
Yes.
and Tim Orrick. Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. So that's for chair, and then for vice chair, do we have a motion for Andrew Belt?
Second.
Brian Rutherford,
Aye.
AJ Lang, Andrew Belt, Rosemary Mail,
Aye.
and Tim Orrick. Thank you. Motion passes.
Good, thank you very much. So we have our new chair, AJ Lang. I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Lang, for going through the rest of the agenda items. Basically, at this point, we could ask, if there's any changes to the agenda or changes to go through the conflicts of interest. So you could go through that order, starting with item C on the agenda items.
Approval of minutes? Is that-
Yes, yep, ask if there's approval of minutes, and then also if you could, actually, no approval of minutes, I'm sorry. Basically, just to ask back on agenda items, C, D, and E, ask if there are any changes to the agenda, disclosure of conflicts of interest or external contract. So basically, just ask if there are any of these items that apply. Yeah. And remember, if you can have your microphone on too. Thank you.
Yes. Are there any additions or deletions from the agenda? Is there any disclosures of conflict of interest?
Andrew Belt, no.
Nope. Disclosure external contacts, discussions with applicant?
Ryan Rutherford, no.
No. Hearing none, then I guess we can go ahead to the approval of the minutes.
Yeah.
Would you read the minutes? please?
Yeah, Sean Penley, planning staff. Actually, there are no minutes to present. Since this is a new board, we would normally have that. You would have for your consideration the previous minutes for this board, but since this is a new board, we do not have any minutes, and it's been 2 years since our previous meeting. But going forward for the next meeting, so following this as an example, we will have minutes from this meeting. And those would be presented to you the next time for your meeting, and you'd get a copy of those. So if you have any questions or comments on that, you could do that at that time. But for this evening, there are no minutes to review.
Are
And
there any board reports?
board reports, thank you.
Sorry, Sean. The bylaws.
I'm sorry. Yep, we skipped right past item B. I'm sorry. We do need to go back to bylaws. So if you could, Mr. Chair, we need to adopt the BZA bylaws. So you have a copy of those draft bylaws. And the one item I will note, if you have any questions on this, certainly feel free to have that discussion. You'll make a motion and you'll approve these as well. But there is one change that staff would like to make to Article 2, Section 2.01. Our legal staff did have a recommendation to change this. Melissa, does their draft copy include this change? Okay. So in section 2.01, we have added a sentence at the end. The BZA shall also hear and may grant requests for variances that satisfy requisite conditions. So that's just an additional item we wanted to add to the bylaws. There are no other changes that staff has recommended. If the board feels it's appropriate, we can make any changes to these bylaws, or you could make a motion to approve as written with that change that staff recommended.
This is Andrew Belt. I'd like to make a motion to approve the bylaws.
Brian Rutherford, second.
We'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Brian Rutherford,
Here.
AJ Lang,
Yes.
Andrew Belt,
Aye.
Rosemary Mayo,
Yes.
and Tim Orick. Thank you. Motion passes.
And Mr. Lang, Mr. Chair, for board reports, there are no updates for the Board of County Commissioners since there are no items that have been considered by the board from this BZA. And for Planning Commission actions, there's also no update at this time. So no board reports this evening.
So no board. Sean, could I ask, is the county going to issue to the new board members a book on what the regulations and everything else are?
A copy of the zoning regulations?
Yes.
We can certainly do that. We can provide you with a hard copy of the zoning regulations. We can also send you a link. We have this available online. We do have our full zoning regulations. I will note, I guess I should mention this as a board report update. It's not happened yet, but we are going to start very soon a major update to our zoning regulations. The zoning and subdivision regulations, we're getting ready to start work on that. We anticipate it'll be up to about a 2-year process.
Mhm.
So we're going to do some extensive updates. We haven't started it yet, but we expect to start that later this summer. But in the meantime, for our active and the regulations that are in effect, yes, we can provide you with a copy and we can also send you a link to that.
I know that the copy I have is 7 years old.
Okay. Yeah, it's probably, there have been some updates. We do annually, we do recommend amendments to the regulations, and the planning commission considers them. And then the board of county commissioners do approve those amendments. So there have been updates in the last 7 years. So we'll be happy to send you an update on that and make sure you have it available for your review.
I would expect that with all the changes coming, right?
Right.
that
Yeah.
Those will be effective as they're approved, correct? So.
Yeah, so anytime we have amendments, they're effective immediately. So the online version is always the best. That way you're referring to the most current copy of the regulations, but certainly if you like the hard copy, we can make that available as well.
No.
Thanks.
We ready for business? I take it the applicant is here. Application number W 24-378 BZA, variance at 20200 Mission Road. Phillips Engineering, applicant, right along with Eric. Reading that.
Westfall.
Westfall, yeah. Owner are requesting a variance from the 30-foot maximum height requirement for an accessory building instead of allowing a 44-foot tall accessory building, which is an existing building on 10 acres located at 20200 Mission Road in Section 9, Township 15, Range 25, Johnson County, on property zoned RUR, which is Rural District.
Thank you. Karen Miller with the Planning Department. So I will start out by giving you a little bit of background on this request, and then I'll go over the staff analysis of the 5 criteria that have to be met in order to approve a variance. And then after that, I'll go over the recommendation and stipulations. So to begin with, as you mentioned, this is a variance to allow an accessory building height of 44 feet instead of the maximum of 30 feet allowed for an accessory building in the RUR district. However, this is an existing building. And the purpose is to convert the use of an existing 44-foot tall former church building to be used as a residential accessory building. The church building is now vacant. It's been vacant since about 2022 when it was put up for sale by Bethany Lutheran. And during the time it was for sale, planning staff did field inquiries from several churches, quite a few churches, but ultimately it was not bought by a church. It was bought by a private individual. Besides being the RUR zoning district and having one vacated church building, the site size is 10 acres. So planning staff recommends approval of the variance. Planning has found that all of the 5 variance criteria have been met, and we'll go over that with the analysis. In terms of the background information, Bethany Lutheran was established in 2005 through approval of a conditional use permit for a church. As part of that conditional use permit, the elevations and site plan were also approved and attached as a requirement for approval. So specifically in our regulations, it states that churches and some other types of buildings are typically taller than other buildings around it, and that that extra height within the zoning district can be approved through the conditional use permit. And that's exactly what happened. So in 2005, and then again in 2018, the previously 80-acre parcel that the church was on was platted so that the church was placed on a 10-acre parcel, and the remaining 70 acres stayed vacant until just very recently. So in 2018, that action of reducing the size of the church lot required the plat, and also it required an amendment to the existing conditional use permit. So this use as a church was considered both in 2005, 2018, and in 2018, the conditional use permit was granted a 30-year term. And that is specifically allowed for churches in our zoning regulations, that 30-year term. And it also, at the time, it was found to be, the building and the use was found to be consistent with and in character with the uses and zoning of the area. So the use and the building height has been approved for the neighborhood twice now. And so now we're circling back and considering it in a different way a third time. And I'll just make two notes. I emphasize one thing, that this is an existing building. We're not requesting a new accessory building at 44 feet. And then also just to note is that we're considering only the height of the building and not the proposed use. The residential accessory use is allowed in the zoning district by the regulations. Also, the existing size for a residential accessory building is allowed by the zoning regulations in the setback. So if this building was 30 feet, then we wouldn't be talking today. A variance would not be needed. The only thing that would have been needed would be a building permit for a change of use from church to accessory building. And so if this is, just as a side note, if this variance is approved, then the next step would be a building permit to change to an accessory building. So I think I mentioned before, the Bethany Lutheran Church occupied the building for about 19 years. And there was some water damage that occurred in around 2021, 2022. And the church decided to not repair, but to move on to a different structure. And so put the building up for sale. And it was on the market until 2024 and until the present landowner bought the site. The new owner desires to use the existing church building for personal storage and a hobby workshop, and those are allowed uses within the underlying RUR zoning district. And just as a note, if this variance is approved, staff has a recommended stipulation to rescind that current conditional use permit for a church. And that would be a recommended stipulation of approval. So I'll take a look at the area. So here's the existing property. It's at approximately 199th and Mission Road. Here's an aerial of the property. It's outlined in blue. You can see the church building, the existing parking lot, and the driveway. This is how the church building would look as an accessory building. This is the south elevation. This is an elevation taken from the approved conditional use permit for the church. And here is the height. It's just a hair over 44 feet. This is the north elevation. Here is the approved site plan that was attached to the church conditional use permit. Again, the building, the parking lot. An aerial view of the surrounding area. Here's the 10 acres. Here's that leftover 70 acres. Here is the plat of Reserve of Town and Country. It's generally about I think about 2 or 3 acre parcels. It has residential zoning. This was already here when the church was approved in 2005. This is a fairly old plat. And then just recently, earlier this year, a similar plat was approved for the 70 acres. So something very similar to what's existed for decades now will go in here in the near future. And this is what the approved plat would look like. It's called Blue Valley Reserves. And here's where the church is. And so now I'll just go ahead. So here is the church building. It has RUR zoning. The green is rural zoning, which requires at least 10 acres and allows single-family homes, accessory buildings, and agricultural uses by right. And then the yellow is residential zoning, and that allows single-family homes. And I'll get back to that. So in general, the character of the area is small lot residential subdivisions with residential zoning, and that generally has internal local road systems and lots less than 10 acres. And then also it has large parcels with RUR rural zoning, including dwellings on at least 10 acres and agricultural uses. Also a note that staff considered the minimum infrastructure serving the site. That is not a requirement of a variance, and it's not a requirement of a conditional use permit, but we do review and make sure that all infrastructure such as water and roads is adequate. And this was reviewed in 2005 and 2018, and it continues to be, it's adequate for a church, and it's also adequate for the much lower intensity accessory building. So that concludes my discussion on just the general background. Now we'll go to looking at the analysis of the variance itself. So the Board of Zoning Appeals has the authority to review and approve or deny variances. There are certain types of variances that are allowed and certain types that are not. This a height variance, also setback variances and the like are allowed, but use variances are not. So the RUR zoning district, it allows agricultural uses, single-family uses, and residential accessory uses. So this board could not allow a variance to allow like an intermodal terminal on this property or a commercial use on this property if it's not allowed by the zoning regulations. So the way that the staff analysis is set up is that it has the 5 different sections. Each section is for each criteria. The criteria being analyzed is set forth, and then staff lists all of the facts used to review the criteria. And then we list all the facts that we think was particularly relevant to this particular criteria. Then we make a finding. Does all the facts support approval of that criteria, or do the facts not support that particular criteria? And so all 5 criteria have to be supporting the request for a variance in order to recommend approval of the variance. So, what I'll do is I'll just go over the particular finding for that criteria. In other words, I'll kind of go to the end, let you know what staff is thinking about that particular finding, and then list a few of the more important facts. I won't go through all of the facts because there's really quite a lot to this request, a lot of things to consider, and I'm just going to try to give you the big picture. And if I gloss over it too much, feel free to ask questions about that. So the first criteria starts on page 6, and it's the variance requested arises from such condition which is unique and which is not ordinarily found in the same zoning classification. So that's one part. It's like a two-part issue, and is created by the zoning regulations and not by actions of the property owner or applicant. So the first part is unique condition within the zoning regulations. And so staff found that due to the particular facts of the application, the circumstances of the building are unique and not ordinarily found in the RUR rural zoning district. The context of the building is singular for reasons that it is being vacated, and it is the only church located in the rural district which cannot be converted to a use other than agricultural without a height variance. And so this meets the criterion. So what is particularly relevant is in all of unincorporated Johnson County, planning found 3 churches in the RUR zoning district. So this is the tallest church. The other 2 churches are about 35 feet. And as such, they could be converted to another use. They could be converted to a residential use because the height, they're 35 feet and a residential use can be 40 feet in the rural district. So those other 2 churches have a use that they can convert to instead of just leaving the church standing vacant. But this does not. This church building is 44 feet. The maximum height for a residential building in the rural district is 40 feet. So the church is too tall. For accessory buildings, it's 30 feet. So that's too tall again. So those were the 2 major ideas that staff had with review of this criterion. The second part of this criterion is that and planning found that due to the particular facts of the application, the variance request is created by the zoning regs for the reason that the construction of the subject building at the current height was allowed by the zoning regulations through an approved conditional use permit. The approved conditional use permit will eventually expire, that the subject building, due to its height, cannot be changed without a variance to either a single-family dwelling or residential accessory structure, which are the only 2 types of buildings other than agricultural buildings permitted by right in the zoning district. So it's really key that the zoning regulations through approval of the conditional use permit allowed this building at this height to be constructed. So zoning recommends a finding that the first criteria is supportable. So moving on to page 9. And so as support of looking at the church building as compared to the other 2, this is Bethany Lutheran at 44 feet, and this is Countryside Church. It's on 175th Street near Heritage Park. It's about 35 feet. And this is First Assembly of God located on 135th Street, just west of the city of Olathe, and it's about 35 feet.
Is it appropriate to ask a question?
Go ahead.
I believe you said earlier that these 2 other churches at 35-ish not be able to be an accessory structure.
So correct. They couldn't be accessory, but they could be a single family residential. They have something they could be converted to. So the rural district, it allows single-family homes, and those can be a maximum of 40 feet. So in those two churches, they could allow that. In the rural, yeah. Mhm. So it can be neither.
Yeah, ordinarily it'd be a max of 30. So
For-
that
uh-huh.
would also not be
They would not.
variance.
To be an accessory building, yes. Correct. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. I'm struggling with it.
Oh, uh-huh. Yeah. Well, even if only only three churches had this problem in all of unincorporated Johnson County, that's still that's a unique situation, if only three.
8 means one.
I'd have to look it up, but
Yeah, the uniqueness of this
Unique
scenario.
means there's nothing else like it. So it's struggling. Anyway.
It's-
You've answered my question.
I think the view of planning staff is it's unique in that there's no other structure other than agricultural, which is, that's not a particularly appropriate use for the building. There's no other structure that this can be converted to other than the CUP that was approved that will eventually expire. So that's how this is unique. The other two buildings have an alternative to convert to something else. This does not have an alternative to convert to something else. So that is unique. So. All right. Okay. Sure. So the next one on page 9 is B, the granting of the variance will not adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners or residents. So planning found that due to the facts of the application, the building, which was established at its current height in accordance with the zoning regulations, will continue to be consistent and compatible with the existing uses and zoning and have minimal detrimental effects to nearby properties and therefore will not adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners. And so in the facts, we considered that this building, exactly as it is today, has existed for 19 years. That the building has become an established fixture in the neighborhood at its current height, and that in 2005 and 2018, the church, as it's currently established, was found by the county to be, among other things, consistent and compatible with the existing uses and zoning, and to have minimal detrimental effects to nearby property. So those are some of the highlights. And then also we looked at from 2018 on, what's been going on in the neighborhood. Has it changed at all? The only change, as I outlined, was the new subdivision approved abutting the south and west property lines. And that is very similar to the existing Town and Country subdivision that was there before the church was established, and it's been very harmonious. So there's really, it's just an expansion of the existing residential use. Any questions on that? All right, C. Sure.
I guess I'm just unsure on whether we want all the questions at the end or.
Most of the time, planning staff does the whole presentation and then we take questions. But if there's a lot of information here, and if it's better for you to ask after each, so I do not mind. So C is on page 12. strict application of the provisions of the zoning regulations will constitute an unnecessary hardship upon the property owner represented in the application. So the finding that staff made was that due to the particular facts, the strict application of the zoning regulations regarding the maximum height would create an unnecessary hardship for the reason that there would not be any other likely uses of the existing building that did not require a variance. In addition, modification or removal of the building is not feasible or practical given the type and design of the existing building. So therefore, without approval of a variance, of a height variance, the property owner is left without a suitable use for the existing building. So planning finds that this criteria is supported. We looked at the fact that Bethany Lutheran discontinued using the property as a church, that it was listed for sale in 2022. And during that time, multiple churches looked at the property, but did not actually buy it. And we consider strict application of the zoning regulations would result in requiring the property owner to use the building in a manner that does not require a variance. And so alternative uses considered and discussed with the applicant were use as a church complying with the underlying conditional use permit. I mentioned that. Use of the subject building for ag purposes. The building was designed as a church. It has finishes that are much higher level than an ag building. And use as an typical agricultural uses would probably add a lot of wear and tear to the building and would not be satisfactory. We discussed with the applicant reducing the height of the building. Mr. Westfall talked with Phelps Engineering about it, his engineer, and they found that it was not particularly feasible to reduce the height. And also, that dramatic peaked roof is really part of the character of this building, and removing that would actually make it more of a commercial look and really would not blend in with the neighborhood quite nearly as well as the existing building. Another possibility open to the applicant is demolishing the building and constructing a new residential accessory building. And that would be allowed. But typically, adaptive reuse of an existing structure is considered to be more efficient and sustainable and a better approach as compared to demolishing and new construction. So, so those are some of the things considered when we made our finding for this criteria. Criteria D, which is on page 13, the variance desired will not adversely affect the public health, safety, morals, order, convenience, prosperity, or general welfare. We found that at its current height, all of these elements would not be adversely impacted for the reasons that churches are often repurposed for residential or commercial uses within a community, and this variance would allow an adaptive reuse of an existing church building with a residential accessory use. We also found that the continued use of the building would be consistent and compatible with existing uses and zoning and have minimal or no detrimental effects to nearby properties. That was a finding in the 2005 and 2018 CUPs, and it continues. Number 3, the change of use from church to accessory building would decrease impacts on the surrounding area. There'd be much less activity on the site, and fewer trips, fewer parking, things like that. And then also, City of Overland Park has not objected to the variance request. So I contacted Overland Park staff, made sure that they were aware of this application, and they did not have any comments regarding it. In other words, they were neutral.
Pardon me, Karen, AJ Lang.
Yeah.
Overland Park on their residential is what, the maximum 45 feet? I think I.
I didn't ask them about any of their regulations. So if you
The
know,
reason why they didn't comment is that,
because it would meet,
yeah, the residential, I do believe is higher.
they didn't point that out to me. So thank you.
Ms. Miller, Andrew Belt, it appears that staff has gone to great lengths of putting this together. We've been through this, those board members who have been here, with some
Right.
legacy. This seems like a eerily similar combo of two of our, previous board considerations. And yeah, I don't think, since the church has been there, it's already established. It doesn't have any external obsolescence on the neighborhood that surrounds it. The new development had this in consideration long before they established their planning. And I think as a board, we're held by the boundaries of, the RUR, and the use is really not our consideration. It sounds like planning has really gone overboard in the report of what's necessary. I don't see, I don't have any objections. This is the best use, even if not intended use. It's the best use for the future. I would
Well,
believe.
Tim Oric, I guess I'm a little troubled because I think we are changing the use.
Tim, could I have you speak into your microphone? Thank you so much.
I guess one of the questions I've had, this was, and you referred to 2005 and 2018, that it received approval, but it received approval as a church, right? So there's not been any approval of this as an accessory building at this height. And so that, I mean, that troubles me that we are really changing the underlying use. And if it was allowed to be constructed as a church because it's got a conditional use permit, then anything that's constructed in the future as a church is going to have this fallback position too. So I'm struggling with that component of the analysis. And I guess I'm also struggling that when we say it's can't be used for anything else, but it appears there was a lot of interest in it being used as a church.
Interest, but
Consistent with the conditional use permit. So,
but found not feasible. So
I'm
they
sorry,
consistent, but found not feasible for their particular
how do we know
situations.
Uh, Mr. Orr, and Mr. Chairman, Sean Penley, planning staff, I'll add, that was certainly a question staff reviewed as far as the use. That is not a consideration, of course, of the BZA for a change in use, but the use of an accessory building and also a residential use would be permitted by right in the RUR district. Karen mentioned it at the beginning of the presentation. So the use is, yes, it is changing from a church. However, that's not the issue for the variance. So accessory buildings would be permitted. So it's not it is, although it's a change in use, it's not a change that's to a use that's not a permitted use by right. So it's a permitted use in the RUR district.
am I correct that even though it says accessory residential, it doesn't need an actual residence?
That's right. That's right. So you could have an accessory building in and of itself, and it doesn't have to actually have a residence on the property. That's right. That's why staff did consider that as part of this to make sure that although, yeah, you're right, it's no longer a church, that's true, but just an accessory building in and of itself would be a permitted use. The only reason it's not just permitted by right and Mr. Westfall couldn't just start up, use and get a permit was because of the height. So that's the only reason for the variance is the height, but that's true,
No,
right?
I get that part.
But you're right, there are certainly other things it could be. Yes, it could be a church, but it's, staff is, I can tell you, fielded no less than 100 calls from different properties or interested parties looking to purchase the property. And for various reasons, it was not feasible to use as a church. But it's certainly, yes, there's other uses it could be, but this is the first actual viable use that has been presented to staff for the actual use of the building. And it is a permitted use. The only thing that doesn't meet the requirements is the height.
Well, but it was suitable as a church for 19 years and presumably could be again. Again, I'm
Sure.
kind of struggling with that aspect of it.
If I could, Andrew Belt, I think one of the considerations we have to, and we learned this in the past, we have to really kind of narrow our focus to what the scope of the BZA is. And Tim, your points are very valid.
Well, I mean, but we've got to find that it's unique, and we've got to find that it wasn't caused by the regulations. And I mean, I think it was caused by the fact that it was given a conditional use permit. Yeah, well, you can do this if it's a church. And I don't think this would have been approved as an accessory building as it exists, correct? Wouldn't be in compliance.
I think that could certainly be the case. That's right. Staff certainly couldn't approve it as a permitted, as an accessory building without the variance. But yes, if it were considered on its own merits for just an accessory building, you're right, it would be evaluated on a different criteria. This is a unique case. As Karen mentioned, staff considered it unique because it's been a vacant building for so long and there's been no other use. But you're right, it could certainly be used as a church. That's true. But our staff finding and our recommendation was it is unique because there's a use, it's a permitted use as an accessory building. It's just unique in that the use for their particular accessory building wouldn't meet the height requirements.
I
And
also-
it's
if I
existing.
could-
It's
if I
an
beg your
existing
pardon,
building. That's
Andrew-
why.
Andrew Belt, I think the other thing that we have to consider is not only is the scope of the board. We can only consider the variance in the height. That's our main, not the intended use. But, your point is very valid. I think the economic impact on the neighborhood by allowing it to stay vacant for an extended period of time could be far worse to the surrounding.
Yeah, but that's not one of our criteria.
That's exactly right.
For granting a variance.
Neither is the intended use.
Understand, but again, I'm struggling with the uniqueness aspect and that there's no other. And again, just for going forward, when we talk about it being unique, I'm struggling with, well, what does that mean? I mean, to me, unique means it's one of a kind, that I'm not, because it sounds to me like these other two churches are potentially in the exact same situation. If they were to change a use.
Brian Rutherford, it's the only church building structure that is of its height in its zone district in the county. There are two other churches that exist, but they are not of the same height. The point would be they could be residential. If they're Overland Park, they could be residential as well. This is the only one exceeding all those height thresholds that is vacant. It is also happened to be a church when it was constructed. Andrew's point is that our doctrine is to access the variance, which is the 4 foot or 4 foot 1 inch, whatever it is, versus the regulation.
Yeah, I understand that, but I thought in order to do that, we've got to make all these findings. We've got to make sure that facts fit these criteria, and that's, I guess I'm struggling. Anyway,
Rosemary
I
Mayo.
understand.
Yeah, absolutely. No.
Yeah, Rosemary Mail, the realtor in me, when you think of the height, doesn't faze me because that it should be an easy acceptance because it's in the rural district. That RUR zoning is so minimal on its requirements from the county versus every other zoning when it comes to land, acreage, properties. So that's why, I mean, the only thing I was looking at versus is where lights are, but it's already been approved at its worst part of lights. Commercial would be worse than residential, and its placement on the lot is not it's great for the surrounding subdivision residential areas.
This is Brian Rutherford. I have just a question. So the conflict that seems like Tim's dealing with is the residential, I know that the use isn't part of our oversight, but if he was to apply or the applicant was to apply instead to make it a barn, but didn't put livestock in it, if it's for storage, in wood craftsmanship and it was applied as an agricultural barn instead of a residential permit, then the height becomes a non-deal breaker and you could not actually raise any livestock or do anything. And you could call a dandelion patch a bee crop for harvesting honey. I'm just thinking abstractly about, I'm not trying to challenge any of the rulings that you've done or findings, just thinking, if I understood correctly, the agricultural use, so then would cause no issue for us to consider, or am I not understanding the agricultural side of that? Because
So agricultural purposes are exempt from the regulation. You're right. If that building was used for an agricultural purpose, the variance would not be required. I discussed, the use, and the applicant is requesting personal uses. So
Yeah,
but you are correct.
I'm sorry, Karen. I think that, the residential is or the agriculture is an alternative consideration, but it's not a feasible or realistic.
yeah, Brian, sorry, it was Brian. I didn't mean to, I was
Yeah,
just
no, I understand.
bringing it because
I'll just bring everybody back to that the purpose of this is not an approval of a CUP. We're looking at a variance here, and it is unique in that of the three comparable structures, it's the only one that's as high as it is, that's requesting to be an accessory building where the other ones wouldn't have to go through the same thing. But I don't,
But the other ones, I'm sorry, two
Yes.
more. But the other ones would have to go through this process to be accessory buildings. Correct? I think because you
Yes.
said those were 30 feet max. They could
Correct.
be residences,
But not
not
accessory.
residential accessory like we're being requested to rule on.
Correct.
Yeah, that's, I'm just struggling with the unique. But
you want to make a motion?
motion or not?
I don't.
It sounded like you
No.
were moving towards.
I'm trying.
No,
It's okay. It's okay.
AJ Lang, we will go ahead and let staff complete their report, and then any other questions that you will have for Karen, you can ask her. Then we will hear from the applicant. So,
Thank you. So the last finding, it regards the spirit and intent of the zoning regulations. And we found that, granting the requested variance to allow the legally established existing building to be used as a residential accessory building, which is a permitted use in the underlying zoning district, would not be opposed to the general spirit and intent of the zoning regulations. And we underlined in our facts that this would be, it would not allow construction of a new 44-foot building, but would allow an adaptive reuse of the existing vacant church building. So, which is some of the facts that you guys just recently discussed. So, staff recommends approval. Staff's findings supported all of the 5 criteria. We have 3 stipulations. Generally, the purpose of the stipulation is to not allow new construction at a height greater than what's allowed by the RUR zoning district. And we also recommend to require rescinding the resolution approving the CUP as a church. And there is a recommended motion if you wish to use it. And that concludes my comments.
are there any other questions for Ms. Miller? Karen, I do have one, AJ Lang. Notifications were sent out to the
Yes,
surrounding property owners, right?
yes.
And that was within 1,000 feet? Thank you. And, I guess I take it since it was not in the packet, you did not receive anything back? from any of those residents?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. I completely forgot. The owner of the 70-acre parcel that recently was recommended for approval of the plat. Sent me an email asking about the site. I, sent him a description and he didn't email back and
Nothing.
nothing.
Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me.
Any other questions? None? All right. And who is representing the applicant? Would you like to speak to the board?
Hi, I'm Eric Westfall. I'm a resident of Leewood. As Mr. Belt said, the staff did a very thorough job on the packet, so I really don't have much to add, but happy to answer any questions you might have.
Andrew Belt, thank you. I think the only one I would ask is we're not building racetracks or anything like that, right? Yeah, okay.
No, sir.
I think this is, I think it's in the spirit and nature of what the board is here for. So thanks for buying it, not letting it sit there.
Any other questions for the applicant? Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak? Seeing none? Then let's go ahead. Is there any other questions for the staff or the applicant? Hearing none, then we'll close the public hearing. On that, now the discussion by the application for the board.
Andrew Belt, no, I think we've covered it. I mean, there's a lot of peripheral questions you could ask, but again, we have to be very cautious to stay within the scope of the board and what we're being asked to approve or deny. And I think that includes.
Rosemary, do you have any comments?
Nope, I'm all on board for it.
Brian Rutherford, I'll just second kind of what Andrew is saying here in the sense that the spirit of the board is to assess the variation as it is in this particular microcosm of this siloed off entity. I do understand Tim's concern about like a ruling, but this is not a court of law. We're not legislating from the bench on like future approval of something based on this particular situation. Any other variants have to be assessed on the same criteria. So I understand the concern. But again, like Andrew said, the intent of this is to kind of assess this right now. I think that's in the nature of our operating guidelines.
Tim?
Nothing more.
All right. Hearing no other discussion, then do I hear a motion?
I move that the board approve application number 24-378 BZA for a variance to allow an accessory building height of 44 feet where the zoning regulations require 30 feet, subject to the stipulations recommended by staff, and for the reason that the request complies with all of the criteria required for the approval as specified by the zoning regulations and state statutes, more specifically set forth in the findings of fact recommended by state or staff. And this is Rosemary Mail.
Do I hear a second?
Brian Rutherford, second.
I will go ahead and do a roll call. Brian Rutherford,
Aye.
AJ Lang,
Aye.
Andrew Belt,
Aye.
Rosemary Mail,
Aye.
and Tim Orick.
No.
Thank you. That is 4-1. Motion passes.
Thank you. And I'll just mention that as part of the requirements of the regulation, within 10 days, the Board of Zoning Appeals will issue a written decision. Staff will prepare that, and that's signed by the chair of the BZA. So I'll be contacting you, Mr. Lang, to get that taken care of. And then this will be passed to the Board of County Commissioners. They have a certain amount of time in which they can pull the item up and hold a public hearing to further consider it. If after that window has passed, if they have not, then it just simply stays as is.
Thank you. And thank you, staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Sean Penley, planning staff. I just want to thank the board again for your participation and joining the new Board of Zoning Appeals. We will certainly let you know of any future cases. So we would notify you when there is an appeal application or a variance application. Although this board does have a regularly set meeting date. I believe is this the second Wednesday of the month? Those are the regularly scheduled days and it's on the calendar, but we would notify you, of course, when there is an appeal pending. So you'd receive that. And then we will forward you copies of the current zoning regulations and send you any updates. And then as Ms. Miller noted, we'll forward you, Mr. Lang, that copy of the findings that you would sign. And otherwise we'll notify the board of any other updates. So thanks again. We appreciate your volunteerism for this board. Thanks.
Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
This is Andrew Belt. I second it. First it.
You want to make the
Love it.
motion? Got a motion? Do I hear a second?
Brian Rutherford, second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you.